So I was kind of looking up his history, Joseph James D'Angelo, because it's great in this book how kind of cataloged Michelle McNamara puts his crimes of, like, you see the clear progression of him from burglar, and he, you know, was sexually assaulting women.
Visalia Ransacker.
To the
East Area Rapist, eventually the Night Stalker.
When you look at Visalia Ransacker, the first crimes he did, the first burglaries he did when no one was home.
Right.
Then he started doing it while people were home, and then he would expose himself to, the women in the house. And he commits his first murder as the Visalia Ransacker.
Yes.
But it was kind of
wasn't intentional.
He
wasn't planning on necessarily killing Claude Snelling.
No, he wasn't planning on it. It was basically he was exposing himself to the man's teenage daughter. The man chased him and he shot him.
And he almost got caught that night, and there never would have been another.
And then the next burglary he did, a police officer showed up and he shot the police officer.
Right.
And then he leaves Visalia and he goes to Sacramento. He was a police officer in Visalia, and a lot of people are saying, like, he left because another officer, or he wasn't.
No, he was. Yeah,
he wasn't a police officer in Visalia, but he was close by.
It was in another town.
Yeah. And then a lot of people are saying, you know, he thought he was going to get caught because this police officer saw his face and could easily recognize him, one police officer recognizing another. So he moves to a town that's like 20 minutes north of Sacramento, and he becomes the East Area Rapist because he started this progression of crimes in Visalia, and then he moves on to the next level of his crimes in Sacramento. Do you have up his...
Well, they also called him the Cordova cat burglar before the Visalia Ransacker.
Right. And it's also crazy because going back to like Michelle's kind of goal of just making sure that every victim is accounted for. Most people like thought that the Visalia Ransacker had nothing to do with the rest of the cases. You know, through DNA, they were able to prove that the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker were the same guy in like 2001, but it wasn't until like he got caught that they said like, oh, and he was also the Visalia Ransacker.
Well, in the book, there's even still some speculation about. They don't 100% say he was a bit. If my memory serves me, I haven't read the book.
Michelle,
it's obviously
it's heavily implied. Michelle kind of goes back and forth on it because in the book, she has a chapter on Visalia, and she's like, it's worth bringing up, but I don't know if this has anything to do with it. And then in the documentary, she goes like, oh, I don't think it was him. And then she kind of goes back and forth of just like, actually, if it wasn't him, it would be a huge coincidence.
Yeah, because I mean, the way that when he graduated is a weird word to use, but I just did, to raping people, he was still kind of ransacking their homes in the same way. By the way, he was a police officer in Auburn.
Right. And then he was a police officer, not in Sacramento, but he grew up in Sacramento. Mm-hmm. And that's where like the bulk of his crimes kind of are. He's the East Area Rapist for the longest amount of time, and he has the most amount of victims as that, I guess, you know, persona or
50 rapes.
Yes,
which is
two murders.
It's
which is insane.
Absolutely insane.
It's it's almost like impossible to process.
Right. Like, I don't know if we're desensitized to murder, you know, growing up with Forensic Files and then, you know, graduating into all the series on Netflix and all that stuff. Not that you ever get used to it, but there's something about the 50 rapes.
Yeah.
Maybe not that I could imagine killing someone, but there's something so wildly unimaginable about rape that.
Well, it's
50 rapes.
It's 50 women who have to like live with this trauma for the rest of their lives. It's a huge amount of just like emotional toll to put on so many people. That like it literally it's hard to imagine.
Well, and then the effect outward from that, it's like if you rape...
Of also the effects on like the husbands who were tied up,
the families,
while this man was assaulting their wives, the effects on them as well, the effects on the families that takes place,
and then all the interactions that's informed from that action. Yeah, you know, it's almost like you can't, the influence of that can't even be calculated.
Right. And they even say in the documentary, out of all the couples that he attacked, that he had tied up and where he raped the woman, that only one of them are still married today.
And they're in the documentary.
And they're in the documentary. Yeah. And only one of them stayed together. One of the couples stayed together.
I mean, you know, I don't know. It's a weird thing to talk about because obviously the impact of the crime, again, it goes into that influence. Like it's hard to calculate the influence. But yeah, I mean, how do you survive something like that?
Right.
How do you ever, you know, want to be touched again?
Yeah, exactly.
And then how can you... I know that for the one thing that I found interesting just from the man's perspective is like that feeling of helplessness that he couldn't do anything. I mean, I don't know how you could live with that either. I mean, I would want to fucking kill everybody. Yeah. You know? I mean...
But... And then he murders 2 people. And they don't even connect the two murders to the East Area Rapist until kind of years later. He kind of is walking his dog, or the couple was walking his dog. He gets into an altercation with them and ends up like chasing them with a gun and killing both of them.
You know, what I find interesting too is like how in pre-DNA, you saw this a little bit with... Well, you saw it with Richard Ramirez, but how in the 70s when he was committing the majority of his crimes, before the DNA era, just the complete lack of trying to hide DNA is fascinating to me. I mean, you're leaving saliva on beer cans, you're leaving semen, you're leaving fingerprints.
Yeah, he would go into their kitchen while they were tied up and like eat their food.
Right.
I was hearing that... I feel like I keep hitting the desk. I was hearing that like... Because people talk about, you know, the 70s and 80s were like a big time for like there were so many more serial killers
and rapes,
and they were saying like the amount of potential serial killers or serial rapists is actually the exact same today, but today they're usually caught after their first crime. Which is why you don't have like Ted Bundy's or, you know, the Zodiac killers today. Because like one of the craziest things about like serial killers from the 70s, you know, like the Zodiac killer or like the Son of Sam, like wrote letters to the police, which like it is fucking insane because today that would get you caught immediately, probably.
Well, I don't know if you know about the Zodiac copycat killer who was in the early 90s in the city, New York. He did the same thing, and he ended up getting caught because he was a fucking idiot. He shot his own sister in the ass, and then they went and investigated him, and he really did do that. He got into a fight with his sister, and he shot her in the ass. And then the police noticed his handwriting, and they were like, this is the handwriting from the letters that the Zodiac's been sending in. That's how he got caught. But anyway, the fact... Greg likes that one.
No, it's just fucking stupid. Well, I shouldn't laugh because we're talking about a pretty serious thing.
But what I think is interesting, the pre-DNA era, is that like obviously he was so careless with the DNA because he's not anticipating that the DNA is going to come back to bite him in the future.
Right.
I wonder what we're all doing now. The answer is probably somewhere in here. That is the new version of DNA.
Oh, it's cell phones.
Sure.
So bringing this back to my film career,
right,
of when I used to work on a lot of investigation discovery.
Can you say the show you worked for?
It was The Perfect Murder.
Right.
And then also I worked on A Crime to Remember, but that was more like murders from like back in the day, like the 50s and 60s.
Oh, I remember that.
Yes.
When you were doing that.
Yeah.